Hey guys, this is Sam, and now that iOS 11 is officially out for everyone, I want to show you 101 new features and changes to take a look at. So kicking things off, we have Control Center. This is entirely new. If you swipe up from the bottom of your display, you're going to see the Control Center now fills the entire screen instead of just a portion of it. And with that being said, not only do you get a new design, you can also rearrange and customize the toggles to be laid out however you'd like. Screenshotting in iOS 11 also received a pretty big upgrade. Now they're going to go down to the bottom left-hand corner of your screen instead of going straight into the Photos app, so you can either save them or delete them immediately. You're also going to get this new pop-up when you tap on the screenshot where you can mark it up, draw on it, or add text, or share it with somebody else straight from here. If you're on an iPad and you're on the lock screen and you tap the screen with an Apple Pencil, now it's going to take you straight into the Notes app rather than having to launch it up separately. If you ever listen to podcasts in the stock podcast app, it received an update in iOS 11 to make the design look a little bit different and a lot more similar to the stock music app. Siri has received a voice upgrade for a number of languages in iOS 11, so rather than straight up talking to a robot, it almost sounds like you could be talking to a human, and it sounds really nice. Augmented reality, or AR, is one of the biggest new features in this update. It's going to allow you to do everything from use your phone as a virtual tape measure, to use your phone to watch a SpaceX rocket land in a pool in your backyard. The spectrum goes all the way across the board from extremely practical to entirely useless, but I guarantee you'll find something in between that you'll have an interest in checking out. I've made a number of videos talking about cool AR demos, so if you want to check those out, make sure you click in the top right hand corner of the screen. VoiceOver, which is an accessibility feature, can now read descriptions for images, so instead of just reading the page and then skipping the image, it can now tell you a little bit about what that image is. Automatic setup is going to make configuring new iOS devices easier than ever. You'll be able to take the new device on iOS 11 to scan the old device running iOS 11, so when you get a new iPhone, you'll be able to take a lot of the information from your old device and transfer it to your new device right during setup rather than having to back up through iCloud or through iTunes. On the iPad, there's a brand new floating dock that you can swipe up to enable within apps, and it also matches the brand new dock on the iPhone X, which looks really good and something that I wish Apple brought to all iOS devices in iOS 11. Another big Siri upgrade in iOS 11 is that she can now translate for you. So if you're in a country like Germany and you want to say this meal was delicious in German, you can just ask Siri, hey, how do you say this meal was delicious in German? When you unlock your device in iOS 11, there is a new lock screen animation. So rather than your icons just floating in like they did in iOS 10, the lock screen portion sort of slides up and then reveals the home screen. Another huge feature in this update is the ability to record your screen. You can find the toggle under Control Center's preference panel, tap on it, it'll count down 3, 2, 1 so you can get to the place that you want to start recording, and then it will start recording your screen at around 60 frames per second. And I don't know the exact resolution, that would obviously depend on which iDevice you own, but when you're done recording, you tap on it, you'll hit stop, and it will automatically save it to your camera roll where you can view it, play it back, or share it from there. While the app switcher on the iPhone is just slightly different, the iPad gained a completely new app switcher that combines the multitasking view with Control Center, and I think it looks really good. You've got all your toggles here on the right, and on the left you have a 2x2 grid of your recently used apps. You can swipe up on one to kill it from this view, or you can tap on one to launch it up. Because Siri got smarter in iOS 11, the Siri preference panel in settings has been renamed to Siri in Search, with a number of new options to take a look at. Inside of the clock app, you can finally set seconds in addition to hours and minutes when you're configuring a timer, so if you want to get really specific down to the second mark, you can do that now in iOS 11. Most of the icons on the home screen in iOS 11 have been redesigned, and while a few were very minor like Photos and Safari, Camera, Maps, Notes, Reminders, App Store, iTunes Store, Settings, and Calculator have received some pretty big redesigns that look really fresh. In Safari, if you open the tab view and swipe down, there's a new search tabs option in iOS 11. So if you are one of those people who always has a million tabs open at the same time, you don't have to scroll through all of them to find exactly what you're looking for. Now you can just use search. In the Messages app, muting a conversation is now easier. Rather than having to go into the conversation and tap on the eye icon, you can just swipe over from right to left and tap on hide alerts to mute that conversation. Apple wants to make driving distraction free, so in iOS 11 they added a new feature called Do Not Disturb while driving, which is pretty much like the regular version of Do Not Disturb, and you can figure out all of the settings for it under the normal Do Not Disturb preference panel. You can have it activate automatically when you're driving, manually, or even when you connect to your car's Bluetooth, and this will basically silence all incoming notifications and even auto-reply to some of the people in your contacts, letting them know that you are driving and you're unable to get to the phone right now. iPads running iOS 11 are so much more more powerful than they were before due to a new feature called drag and drop. It allows you to drag and drop pretty much anything in the operating system anywhere, whether it's an app from the dock, or a picture from the Messages app in Notes, or something from Safari like a link into the Messages app. You can drag and drop things everywhere, and it makes using the iPad as a daily computer so much better. The Notes app now supports document scanning on both iPhone or iPad, and I've used it a lot and it works so well. I've tried a few other document scanners in the past, but nothing has been able to crop and adjust automatically to the paper or thing that's in front of me like the stock Notes app. It works so well, and this is just an incredible feature that is so cool to see. The iPad's keyboard is also a lot more powerful in this update. Rather than having to tap in the bottom left hand corner to switch over to the alternate characters, you can now input a lot of these by swiping down on any of the normal keys. AirPlay 2 is going to make controlling supported wireless speakers like the Apple HomePod that comes out later in 2017 easier than ever. You can do it through the music app on your iPhone or through Control Center and play the same song everywhere or a different song on every set of speakers. In the Health app, graphs have received a major update that makes understanding and looking at these data points better than ever. Live photos in iOS 11 have 3 fun editing features. You can now loop them, bounce them back and forth, or even add long exposure for a really professional look. The App Store in iOS 11 has been redesigned from the ground up. It's going to have new daily featured apps and games every day. There are separate sections for both apps and games, and overall, it's a fantastic update that I think you guys are going to love. Back to the Notes app, inline drawings are now supported that will expand when you touch them. iMessage apps were a new feature in iOS 10 that I never totally fell in love with, and in iOS 11 there's a redesigned iMessage app drawer that works a lot better and is definitely an upgrade from what we had in iOS 10. In Apple Music in iOS 11, just like Spotify has had forever, you can finally create your own profile so you can show other people what you've been listening to and follow your friends or other celebrities to see what they've been listening to as well. Notification Center no longer exists in iOS 11. It's been converted into what Apple is calling the cover sheet, which is sort of like a hybrid between what Notification Center used to be and what the lock screen is now. In fact, it's almost identical to the lock screen, except it's going to show you all of your notifications in addition to showing you any media that might be currently playing. The Maps app in iOS 11 now supports indoor maps, so for major airports and shopping centers around the globe, you can now see inside maps to see where stores are or points of interest that wouldn't normally be on a regular map are. There's a new News Spotlight tab inside of the News application that's going to show you stories that have been happening throughout the day or things that you might be interested in. Inside of the Settings app inside of iOS 10, photos and camera were one combined preference panel, but in iOS 11 they are separate now. If you've ever had a hard time typing with one hand in iOS, there's a new feature in iOS 11 that allows you to type easier than before, especially if you have a larger plus-sized iPhone. With the one-handed keyboard option, you can just move the keyboard over to the right or over to the left by tapping and holding on the globe or emoji icon to make typing a little bit easier. Back in the Settings app, there are so many new wallpapers to choose from. During the iOS 10 release cycle, Apple only added the new Wave wallpaper for all devices, but on iOS 11 you have 3 space-themed, lots of flower wallpapers, some retro Apple wallpapers as well, in addition to the iOS 11 stock beach wallpaper. So many good choices here, and I love all the new wallpapers that Apple added. However, while a ton of new stills were added, Apple for whatever reason cleaned out the live wallpaper section aside from the 3 smoke and cloud wallpapers that remain. On the iPad Pro in iOS 11 you can enable the flashlight through Control Center. I believe before you could only get the flash to turn on while taking a photo, so this is a no-brainer change. Another one-handed feature that Apple added with iOS 11 was the ability to zoom in the Maps app. So you can take one hand and double tap and move your finger up to zoom in, or double tap again and move your finger down to zoom out. Password autofill will work outside of Safari now, and some third-party apps like this one it's going to automatically suggest your username and your password, which is really convenient. The News widget now supports a new news video section, so you can actually watch video clips from news providers straight in this widget area. Enabling better password autofill throughout iOS 11 is a new Accounts and Passwords preference panel. It's sort of like a built-in password manager that isn't as fully featured as something like LastPass or 1Password, but for being built in, it's pretty good. The dial pad inside of the phone app received a visual update to match the rest of iOS 11 and is no longer transparent/translucent. During a FaceTime call with iOS 11, you now have the ability to capture live photos that move rather than stills. Hidden deep within Safari's preference panel, there are some new experimental WebKit features, and since I'm not a developer, I don't know what a lot of these do. 2 were randomly enabled by default, but I just haven't messed with the rest because I have no idea what any of these are for. When you're watching a video in what I would assume to be the stock video player, there's a new accessibility option for spoken and braille captions. Inside of the iOS 11 AirPods preference panel, you have the ability to customize what double tapping on either the left or right AirPod will do. Hidden within the display accommodations preference panel inside of accessibility settings, there is a new option called Smart Invert, which is pretty much equivalent to a dark mode. However, before you get excited, it doesn't work super well with a lot of third-party apps, or really any, until they're updated to work with the Smart Invert Colors option. When it works, it's really great. Like in the settings app, it looks almost perfect. Even inside of the stock music app, some colors just don't display as they should. So it's a work in progress feature, but for what it is, it's a half working dark mode. Inside of settings, general, and storage, there are going to be some recommendations here in iOS 11 to free up space on your device. I have a 128GB model, so I've never really had to use these, but if you have a 16 or 32GB iPhone and you're running out of space, you might want to give these a try. Inside of both Safari and Spotlight, you can now view any plane's flight status. On the home screen, there is a new Files app for easily browsing through your documents or sorting them. It's really great because it works with iCloud Drive in addition to some third-party storage options as well, like Google Drive, so you can find your files across the board and find them all in the same place. In Settings, General, and About, the capacity section will now reflect your purchase storage size. So for my iPhone, it's 128GB instead of your storage minus the space that iOS takes up, like it used to. If you enable the Scan QR Code toggle inside of the camera preference panel, if you go into the regular camera app, you can natively scan QR codes, which is one of those features that Android has had forever that I'm so excited to see. If your device language is set to Arabic with iOS 11, you'll see a new system font across the board. If you own AirPods, in the Output/AirPlay section of the music app, you can view your AirPods battery in addition to the AirPods case battery. In the TV provider's preference panel in settings, there are a lot more providers to choose from. Previously in iOS 10, it was relatively limited. GIFs finally work correctly in iOS 11 inside of the Photos app. For the longest time, they wouldn't play and they would be stuck on the first frame or some random frame, but in iOS 11 that has thankfully been fixed, so now GIFs play as expected. Apps that allow you to change their app icon will now notify you when the app icon has been changed. If the battery on your device is critically low, Flash will not work inside of the camera app. You'll get something that looks like this, where Flash is completely disabled. It's really annoying and maybe it'll change in the future, but right now this is how it looks. Icon labels in the iOS 11 docks are completely hidden, which I think gives iOS a really great look and is something that I wish we could disable for all app icons. On iOS 11's lock screen, the passcode bubbles have been updated to match the rest of the new design language in iOS 11. Making a FaceTime call will now sound a little bit different. There's a new dialing tone that sounds like this. In the music app, when you're scrolling through this list of artists, the icon that was previously colorful is now a gray microphone when artists don't have an official icon. A really important feature in iOS 11 that I think each and every single one of you should know about is called Emergency SOS. It will allow you to quickly and rapidly call emergency services if you quickly push the lock button on your iPhone 5 times in quick succession. You'll get a screen that looks like this, and if you slide, it will call emergency services. I made the mistake of doing it for a video, and there were cops at my door within 15 minutes. So it's serious and you guys want to be careful with this, but at the same time it's really important, and if you're ever in a tight squeeze and you can't call 911, just slide that and emergency services will be called. If you own or buy any pair of Apple branded headphones with the W1 chip inside that allows you to pair it to your device just by holding it near, you get this really pretty animation. This is what it looks like on the AirPods, but I've also seen it for the Beats Solo 3, the Beats X, and whatever new headphones Apple has been coming out with, which is super cool. This one is definitely one of those hidden features. So on the home screen, you can move multiple apps at once by tapping on one, and then with the second hand or second finger tapping on other apps that you want to move, and they'll be added to this little stack under your first finger, and then you can drag or drop it to a folder or any other place that you want, and all of the apps that you've selected will move there at the same time. It makes changing up your pages so much easier than before. Whether you're in the App Store or iTunes Store or even in music or news, pretty much all the tab icons in every single one of Apple's stock applications have been updated to reflect the new design language in iOS 11. When these tab icons were first introduced back in iOS 7 and 8, they were really thin and very stenciled, but now in iOS 11 they are so much bolder than they were before. When you swipe down to enable Spotlight search and then search for something, at the very bottom of the results you'll see the options for Search Web, Search App Store, and Search Maps. The three search options have not changed, but in iOS 11 there are new app icons to the right. Heading back to Control Center, a lot of these toggles are now going to animate, where in iOS 10 only a couple did. Whether you're locking portrait orientation, enabling Do Not Disturb, sliding the brightness or volume sliders up and down, or enabling low power mode, all of these have these really clean looking animations. And even though in the grand scheme of what iOS 11 is, these are tiny changes, I really like that Apple finally took the time to focus on the small things. And while we're still in Control Center, if you enable airplane mode in iOS 11, it will no longer automatically disconnect Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. It's going to remember what you had on when airplane mode was enabled, which is nice because if you ever just want to disable cellular functionality, you can do that without completely disconnecting from your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connections. If you've been struggling to find where the auto brightness toggle went, previously it was under display and brightness, but for whatever reason, Apple moved it over to general accessibility and display accommodations. Apparently, auto brightness is now enabled by default, but to turn it off, you have to go into accessibility settings, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I think it's really going to confuse a lot of people. Moving over to the iPhone storage section of the settings app, in iOS 11, you have the ability to offload apps. I talked about it for just a second earlier in this video, but for example, let's say that you're using an app like Clash Royale, it's a game, but you have data on there that you don't want to lose. You can tap here to offload the app, which just means that it's going to remove the application, but it's going to save the actual data on your device. So your save in the game is going to still be on your device, but the game itself will be removed, which is going to free up a decent amount of free space if you're really looking to clear up some storage. In the iOS 11 App Store, checking for updates is super easy. You can just pull to refresh, where in previous versions of iOS, you would have to randomly tap the tab bar 10 times or kill the app to make it look for updates. Now you can just pull to refresh, which is super easy. When you're on the lock screen and you try to open a notification with either a passcode, Touch ID, or Face ID enabled, you get this new dialog and new UI, which looks really clean. When I first saw this, I thought you would have the ability to lock individual apps on the home screen, but unfortunately, this is just for opening notifications. When you kill the last app sitting in multitasking on your iPhone, it will automatically take you back to the home screen rather than having to hit the home button and go there yourself. And if you double tap on the home button to try to get back into the app switcher, it just won't let you do it. In the FaceTime app, instead of doing a half swipe and then tapping delete, you can delete FaceTime calls in the recent section with a full swipe. As the calculator app icon previews, the calculator app has been completely redesigned for iOS 11, but there are no new features. You just have AC in the top left and equals in the bottom right, like you have pretty much forever. If you rotate your device into landscape, you get all those additional options, but for portrait, while the look is a little bit different, the functionality is identical. In the top left-hand corner of the screen for cellular-enabled devices on iOS 11, the cell dots that were first introduced controversially back in iOS 7, they have been removed and replaced with the cell bars that were introduced in iOS 6 and before. At the very bottom of the general preference panel inside of the settings app, you can shut down your device without actually holding on the lock button like you had to before. So if you ever need to shut down your device and maybe your home button was broken or your lock button was broken, you can do that all on the software side now. Like a number of other parts of iOS 11 that we've already talked about, the stock number pad in iOS 11 does look a little bit different. It features smaller but bolder buttons. If you're a huge fan of the iMessage send effects like I am, there are two new ones in iOS 11. I really wish we would have seen more, but right now we got Echo, which is going to show the same message that you're typing but a million times on the screen. Looks kind of funky, and also Spotlight if you literally want to put the spotlight on whatever you just sent. If you are using an iPhone 6s, an iPhone 7, an iPhone 8, or even an iPhone 10, you're going to notice that a lot of haptic feedback for the Taptic engine has been added in iOS 11 from things like pulling to refresh or enabling or disabling toggles. In the settings app, Facebook, Twitter, Vimeo, and Flickr integration has been completely removed, so any accounts that worked with the stock integration just don't work anymore. I don't know why Apple removed this. Sometimes it was more convenient than having the Facebook or Twitter or Vimeo or Flickr apps installed, but that's just gone now. If you really hated going over to the App Store to review apps in iOS 10 and iOS 11, there will be prompts that allow you to review the app from within the app itself. Before, you would have to shoot over to the App Store and it was kind of cumbersome, but now you don't really have an excuse to say no because it's in the same place that you already are. The Wallet app in iOS 11 is much simpler and much plainer than it was in iOS 10. Now it's just got a plain white interface that doesn't look super great to me. If you have any apps installed that haven't been updated in years, there's a chance that they may no longer work with iOS 11, as iOS 11 now exclusively supports 64-bit apps. If you use any newer apps like Facebook or Twitter, YouTube, all of the staples will work on iOS 11, of course, but if you use some really old apps that have not been updated in forever, they might not work anymore, so keep that in mind before updating. If you're ever in a situation where you want to quickly disable Touch ID or Face ID, so the only way to get in your iPhone will be with your passcode, you can do that by quickly and rapidly enabling emergency SOS, which you're going to do by clicking the lock button 5 times in quick succession. Now keep in mind that won't call emergency services by itself, you'll still have to slide, but if you're ever in a situation where law enforcement or some other third party would be forcing you to scan your face or your fingerprint in your phone so that they can see all of your data, you can disable that so only your passcode will allow entry. The stock video player in iOS 11 has been redesigned, so it looks a lot cleaner than it did before. Everything is smaller, and when you turn the volume up and down, it should not go in the middle of the screen. That's been moved up to the top right-hand corner, and it is so much less obtrusive. In the Photos app, if you ever see a photo that you want to turn into a watch face for your Apple Watch, you can go into the share sheet, tap on this option, and turn it into a kaleidoscope version or a regular version. Now this one could be a little bit sketchy, but in iOS 11, Apple claims that Siri can be your personal DJ. So if you say, "Hey Siri, play something that I would like to hear," she should pull up something that you like, but there's also a good chance that she could pull up something totally random. I haven't had a ton of success with it, but I encourage you to try it out for yourself. When you open and close apps in iOS 11, the animation is slightly slower than it was in iOS 10. I did a speed test. If you want to check that out, I'll link it up here in the top right-hand corner of the screen. The results aren't super shocking, but they are a little bit interesting because the app opening animation in iOS 11 isn't actually slower when you open an app. It's just a lot slower when you close out of apps, which is really fascinating. A lot of the headers in iOS 11 look a lot different than they did in iOS 10 because they feature the new bold and punchy iOS 11 design language. And a little trick that you can do with these headers is that when you swipe down, they will get a little bit bigger than before. There is no functional purpose, but it's kind of fun to play with. If someone new is trying to join your Wi-Fi network and you're both on iOS 11, you can share your Wi-Fi password with them rather than having to do that thing where you run to 7 rooms in your house to find the sheet that has your password listed. Now you can just share it from one iPhone or one iOS device to another. With the new control center in iOS 11, instead of just tapping on a toggle, try 3D touching or long pressing. Practically every single one of these has hidden actions that you wouldn't see if you just tapped on it, but with a long press or 3D touch, you can unlock so much more functionality. Under the Siri preference panel inside of accessibility settings, there's an option called Type to Siri that allows you to type what you want to say to Siri rather than verbalizing it out loud. So whether you have an accessibility need where you can't talk to Siri, Siri has a hard time understanding you, or you just want to type in all your queries to Siri, you can enable this option right here. In the top right hand corner of the screen, the battery icon has been redesigned in iOS 11. It's a little bit wider and fatter than it was before. Notification swipe gestures are also a little bit different in iOS 11. When you swipe from left to right on a notification, you'll get the option to open it, or if you swipe from right to left, you can do a long swipe to clear it or a half swipe to view the clear or view options. When you're searching for something inside of the music app in iOS 11, you're going to be offered more specific suggested results. So if you're searching for something like Apple, it's going to say, do you want to search for that in artists, albums, playlists, or songs, among a couple of other options as well, so you can find what you're looking for faster. The Apple Watch app in iOS 11 features new watches that were announced at Apple's September event, like the new cellular and LTE enabled models. In Safari, scrolling in iOS 11 feels so much different than it did before. In iOS 10, it would kind of stop you after a little bit, but it's very buttery and very slick. You can see I'm scrolling down this page and it just keeps going without stopping. It's very similar to how Google AMP pages scroll, and I didn't like it at first, but I got used to it really quick. Inside of the Notes app, you now have the ability to insert tables, and finally, for the 3D touch icons for the Settings app on the home screen, the battery icon is more full, and a couple of other icons have been tweaked. So those were 101 new features and changes inside of iOS 11. It's a massive update, and if you want to see more videos that I've made on iOS 11 in the past, make sure you check up here in the top right-hand corner of the screen. If you learned something new in today's video, I would really appreciate it if you shared this with someone else, and if you enjoyed watching yourself, make sure you drop a like down below, and it will really help me out. For more of this in the future, make sure you hit subscribe down below because I love talking about iOS here. I have been Sam. I hope all of you are doing fantastic, and I will talk to you in the next one.